Hi everybody. We are going to get started here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Leah Rempel, and I'm kind of heading up the December initiative here at the church. And I'm going to pray for our presenters and for everybody listening, and then we are going to get started. So if you have your littles here with you, maybe try and get them eaten quick and off to the fireside room. That's just over there. There's going to be a movie playing, like Larry said, and there'll be the toys over there and everything too. If there's too many, we'll start to overflow upstairs, but try to keep everyone down here. All right, so I'm just going to pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I just thank you. I thank you, Lord, for this church that is just so willing to bring in presenters like this and to talk about hard things. And Lord, I just pray that our eyes and ears and hearts will just be open to what they have to share. Lord, would we try to find our place in the community and how we can help and how we can, just know our place in this, Lord. I just pray that you would just speak so clearly to us. I pray, God, for the presenters, you give them wisdom and the words to say, and just so we'd all be very, very blessed and humbled by this, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Staff Sergeant.
Hello, good morning. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. My name is Colin Hewen. I'm a staff sergeant with the Edmonton Police Service. I've been a member of the police for about 20 years. I'm currently in charge of a section called Covert Operations Section,
Good.
which houses a couple different units in our police service, one of them being our human trafficking area. The topic I'm going to talk to you about today is human trafficking. It does have some terminology and some nomenclature around it that can have impact to some people. I'm going to be using words like sex trafficking, child sex exploitation. I am going to be using those kinds of words that are a little strong to some people if you have little ears. This close? There you go. Okay. Normally my normal voice projects pretty loud, so this room's a little bit different. So thank you. Did everybody get that so far? Should I repeat that? Going to be using some big words. Going to be using some strong words. If there's children in the area that as parents you don't feel comfortable having your children listening to that, or you yourself might have difficulties with that, just so you're aware. So what is human trafficking? Lots of times we have certain biases around what we think human trafficking might be. I know as a policeman, and even when I go talk to my friends and family about what this topic is, a lot of people have preconceived notions as to what they think it is. Imagery such as bondage, packed on a boat, packed in a crate, locked in a basement. These types of images are things that we associate what human trafficking is, and that it's a problem that's somewhere else. It's something that's happening somewhere else. What I want to talk to you today is about what's happening in Edmonton, what's happening in our backyard, what's happening in our province and in our nation. And as horrible as these things are, they do happen around the world. What we're seeing in our own country and in our own backyard is something different than the imagery we have preconceived notions about. Go to the next slide. Essentially, human trafficking is the control over someone else to do what they want them to do. Another word for this, and a common word that we use in this area, is modern day slavery. When we start putting impactful words like that on it, we can start to change the imagery. We can start to change what we're thinking about it. A big word you're going to hear me talk about today is control. When someone has the control over someone else, they're no longer doing that act of their own free will. They're under the control of someone else, and that's what we're talking about when we talk about human trafficking. This is not about two consenting adults and something that we can just look the other way. Our economy here And our demographics here are such that there's more money available here. There's more younger men with money that are looking to purchase sex. That's the impact of what we're talking about here, is the purchase of sex and the exploitation of that. Go to the next slide. When we talk about the law, and as a police officer, the law is obviously quite important to me, but it's very complex, and there's lots of different pieces around the law that make it, there's obstacles and barriers there. The big piece we want to talk about is just some themes that the United Nations and across the world has summed up this crime a little bit better than our criminal code has. We'll just go to the next slide, where we talk about three things. Essentially, human trafficking, HT on your screen, human trafficking essentially is three things. We have an action, we have a means, and we have a purpose. The action is the transfer, transportation, receipt, harboring, recruitment of a person. The means in which they do that can be through threats, abduction, coercion, fraud, deception, being lied to, force, abuse of power, and then we have the purpose. There has to be a purpose for why they're doing those things. That purpose can be forced labor, removal of organs. Yes, that does happen around the world. Servitude or slavery, sexual exploitation, and similar practices to slavery. The primary focus of what we're going to talk about today, between myself and my esteemed partner Kate, is going to be around sexual exploitation. Labor exploitation does occur. Our focus today is going to be on the sexual exploitation part of this equation. Next slide. Back in 2014, the laws changed. More or less, the selling of sex has become legal in our country. The buying of sex remains illegal. I'll say that again. To sell sex, the person selling the sex is immune from prosecution unless that person is doing it in a place where children are around. Schools, parks, playgrounds, that still is an offense. But they're immune from that prosecution. Buying of sex is illegal. So that's something that we just need to get our heads wrapped around. In the last few years, that law has changed around those that are selling their services of sex. Go to the next slide. Some other new offenses came in that were to address the piece around control. There's that word again. If the woman has the right to do what she wants with any business, and if that business that she wants is to sell her body, the law is such that she can do that. She could hire someone to drive her around, be a bodyguard, arrange dates. The laws are written around allowing a woman to have that control. And I'm going to use men being part of the demand and buying the sex, women being the one that supplies the sex or is offering that service. By no means is that always the case. There's always, it could be either way, or there could be other things, but primarily we're seeing the trafficker is a man. Doesn't mean it can't be a woman. Primarily there is the person buying of the sex is a man, and primarily the woman is selling the sex. That's the primary piece. So I'm going to use those terms. Please don't get confused that this doesn't involve any other kind of community where those roles are different. But those are the words I'm going to be using for the lecture here. So these new laws are in place that basically address the control piece. Procuring, material benefit, advertising. If a woman's in control, there's exceptions that she's allowed to hire people to do that. If she's not in control, then there's the offenses for it, which a lot of times we call that activity pimping. The word we're going to be using is the trafficker or trafficking. Go to the next slide. So how does it work? Primarily what we're seeing is it is not what we're seeing in Hollywood. It's not the classic woman gets abducted and then has to do these horrible things or else she gets beat up. Those things do happen. But oftentimes we have a situation where it's a boyfriend or someone who is deceiving the woman under the guise of being a boyfriend and being in love and having that strong emotion attached to it. and that person will control their commodity, and I'll use that word because it's quite strong when we start talking about a person, but in that person's eyes, that's what they are envisioning this woman to be, is the commodity to make them money. And there's a lot of money that can be made. Over $300,000 a year from one woman can be made. And that's not a career, so there's no tax piece in there. But that's what the man can be making off going down this road. So there's that control piece. In the middle there, it talks about guerrilla pimp and Romeo pimp. When we talk about the boyfriend situation and befriending a woman through that deception and through those lies, getting to a point of exploitation where they're making the money for themselves and she can't get out of it now, that's what we would call the Romeo pimp, but we're in love, boyfriend piece. The guerrilla pimp is more of the traditional threats over the woman. And both of them we're seeing here in Edmonton. Primarily the Romeo pimp is the preferable way because it's easier to get that control piece once they're in that relationship. We'll just go to the next slide. And in here kind of depicts that Romeo pimp piece. And again, we're seeing a lot of this happening. In the first stages is the luring. This is a lot of the assessing what vulnerabilities that male can exploit. What's the relationship like with dad? What's the relationship like with the family? What does this woman key on as valuable for her that he can then exploit later and bring up later? Is there any previous trauma, or has she had any issues with sexual trauma before in her childhood? Those are things that they prey on. So they're collecting the information, but they're also making them feel very special. Buy them gifts, take them to the mall, buy them very expensive items. Our culture is such that we tend to really value the possessions more than we do relationships. And when a man's going out and buying the super expensive makeup and shoes and clothes and hair and nails and all these things that the media tells our children are important in life, he's preying on that and buying her those gifts. Now she's going to have to owe him later, right? When we start getting into further exploitation, she's got a debt to him for all those things. Grooming and gaming. This is where all those things are getting to that next level. And then we get into the lies. Now they're in love and dream building about how their lives can get better. And now she has to be in this game that he calls it, because he's controlling her to do these things. The further along she's in with doing the sexual acts, and the compliance is rewarded with that money or drugs, then we get into the next stage. And this is one of those pieces where we often say, well, she made a choice. There was a choice that was made back here where she felt that was okay. She made a choice. She could get out of it at any time. She could just come forward and talk to the police or talk to family and get out of it, no problems at all. That's where, even as a policeman for 20 years, you don't know what you don't know. And this is one of those pieces that I didn't know. She can't get out, because if she tries to get out, she's threatened with the fear of violence, but there's also that shame piece. Isolation comes in here, where he's throughout isolating her from her old life, so that she has no contacts with her old life. At this point, if she wants to get out and go back to her old life, there's that giant piece called shame, where she wants to go back and talk to her family, but she knows as soon as she leaves, he's going to post an ad or lewd photos or part of what her new lifestyle is. He's going to post that to all her Facebook friends or all her Instagram friends. Now her old life looks at her with shame, so she can't go back to her old life. She's right back in with the trafficker because she doesn't have another out for that. There's nowhere else that she can go. There's also violence towards loved ones. There's also, here's something that, when you start thinking about the deception and just the mind games and the psychological aspect of this, oftentimes we'll see in these early stages, the man will buy her a dog, allow her to get emotionally attached to the dog. When we're up into here, he'll actually start threatening that dog, or actually commit violence on that dog. That's just one piece, one example of how they use this the whole game of lies for them. Once she's in, it's very, very, very difficult to get out. And Kate's going to talk a lot more about that piece. We'll go on to the next slide. The reality of this is that it's way more prevalent than we suspect. Again, when I talked in the beginning about our biases around what we think is happening, or what we think human trafficking is, and how this is somewhere else, Kate's going to talk a little more about that as well, but I can tell you that as far as numbers go, this is a vastly underreported event. We as police do not get the type of complaints on this that other types of crimes would get. Those two pieces are massive in why they don't come forward to the police. Threats of violence from their trafficker, and the shame of it. Because now they have to come forward and expose themselves for the lifestyle that they've been in, and they know that that will shatter their previous life. They won't be able to go back to that. So that's those two pieces that are big for the reporting, why they don't come forward to the police. And quite frankly, we've charged a lot of women in the past for prostitution back then. There's not a lot of trust with the police for coming forward. There's not a lot of trust. If I go forward to the police and tell them what I've been doing, they're not going to believe me, or they're going to hold that opinion of me like the police used to do when it was a crime. That's something that, as a police, we need to try to change that and get our minds around how can we as police do that better with our victims out there, or survivors of this crime. Go to the next slide. I'll touch on the law around child sex trafficking. Alberta has a law called the Protection of Sexually Exploited Children's Act that enables the police to be able to apprehend children that are suspected to be in the sexual exploitation or human trafficking trade. So if there's information that a young lady or man is involved in these types of activities, we can apprehend. And through numerous court orders, our PSECA teams, which is what that act is, we're all about acronyms with the police. We really like our acronyms. So the PSECA teams, they're government workers, and they work with the girls at a safe location to be able to get them out of that lifestyle. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later, and Kate's going to get into that a little bit more. But I do want to say this act is 20 years old this year, so we've been celebrating the act and all the great work that's been done over the years. We've been celebrating that all throughout this whole year, so I just wanted to bring that to your attention. I also want to speak on one piece about children as well. Statistically, women involved in the sex trade industry, the majority of them, over 75% of them, have stated and given the evidence that they entered the sex trade industry between the ages of 12 and 14. So when we start thinking about bigger picture, who's being recruited, who's being lured, we are talking about child predators. We are talking about men going after the young women of our communities, and that's happening here. This isn't something that's happening in Thailand, Cambodia. This is happening here and across our nation. And it's becoming more and more prevalent with the advance of technology, where a lot of these pieces are going online. We'll go to the next slide. We'll talk about warning signs. So what do we look for, right? If I'm up here saying that this is happening and that how young these girls are that are getting lured into this, what kind of things can we look for? Well, language, vocabulary around the sex industry. In the previous slide, I had showed you how it progresses from the luring beginning stages over to exploitation. You have to understand that exposure and getting the person more comfortable with sex act for money happens throughout. It's a progression. There might be exposure to pornography. There might be exposure to strip clubs. There might be exposure to his friend who conveniently has a girlfriend who's also involved in the escort industry. And she's talking about how wonderful it is. So there's a build-up. It's not just a day, one day this poor 14-year-old is in school and normal, and the next day they're involved in this. This is a progression over time. It could be months, it could be weeks to months to years progression to that exploitation stage. So these are some warning signs along the way. Excessive primping. How's the hair? One day is this, a week later the hair is becoming something totally different. Signs of trauma or abuse. Could be physical or psychological. Isolation is part of that piece as well. All of a sudden there's STIs and pregnancy that someone wasn't involved in that before. Isolated, and that's a big one. When all of a sudden this young girl goes from having lots and lots of friends and outgoing in school to she's not allowed to talk to anybody. That man doesn't want her to talk to any of her friends anymore. He wants her isolated so that he controls every aspect of her life. That control word again. Withdrawing from family and friends, it's huge. Secretive, always protective of the privacy. Accompanied by someone who seems controlling. That happens all the time. All of a sudden the boyfriend needs to be around all the time. Unexplained money, unexplained clothes, hair, jewelry. Some of these, I have young children, I have a 13-year-old girl. If she came home with some of these makeup kits from Sephora, I think we all know what that is, $50 for lipstick or whatever else goes on their face, I'm not paying for that. I know her mother's not paying for that. Who's paying for those things? And what's their motive around paying that girl for those things? That's a huge one. Any kind of identification documents, they get taken away. It's that control piece, right? I'll control who you give your ID to. Evidence of the sex trade, and then tattoos and branding are actually becoming a thing again. When I first heard this, I thought we were beyond that. I thought tattooing and branding our slaves or prisoners was a thing of the past. That's becoming way more popular, where the man knows he has absolute control when the woman tattoos his brand on her skin. That's huge. Okay, so what are the police doing about it? Are you good? Better? Good? Good? Okay. I have to brace my arm like this then. So what are the police doing about it? Well, we have a mission, and the big piece I want to talk about with what we do and what we keep in mind is our response needs to be victim-centered. We need to consider the victim in all circumstances and what's going to be best for her to get her out of the situation. Arresting, we're not going to be able to arrest our way out of this issue. Some of these men, they do deserve to go to jail, absolutely, for the heinous crimes that they are doing. But that's not always the best thing for the victim. We need to find a way to work with our victims, and Kate's going to talk about that a lot more, about what kind of response is happening right now. Here's a couple things, our next slide here. Here's a couple things that kind of highly contested in the media right now, but our body rep centers. So body rep centers are legitimate, licensed premises in the city of Edmonton where a man can go and purchase sex. And it's licensed by the city and sanctioned by the city. The city is looking at reviewing this through some of the great work, and Kate can talk about that more, or she can answer those questions for you because she was at that meeting, about how the city's going to be looking at phasing out body rep centers in our city. But that doesn't eliminate issues. We'll skip 2 slides, please, to illicit massage business. Here's something I want to bring to your attention, because I think it's there's gaps in our law and gaps in our response as policemen. Illicit massage businesses are businesses that operate as a front of a what we would call a regular massage, a holistic therapeutic massage, where if I had a sore shoulder or injured it in sport and I wanted to go get a massage, I would go get a massage, and I could leave work and I could tell my boss I'm going for a massage. I would go to this place, I'd fill out my forms, it's very professional. I would get a receipt for it, I would submit that receipt to my healthcare insurance, and I would get reimbursed for that because it's part of that system. That's holistic, legitimate massage. Illicit massage businesses are operating with that same front, but once you get in the back door, there's sexual acts for money that are occurring. I still get my receipt. I can still claim it through Blue Cross. I can still tell my boss because it's socially acceptable for me to leave work and get a massage. In the back, it's not as professional. Right? There's not the classic massage table. There's a queen-size mattress. There's a shower in there. There's, instead of massage oils or legitimate massage oils, there's sexual lubricants and those types of things. So they're not even good at hiding it, but our gaps in law are such that we need to address that piece. A big factor in these illicit massage businesses as well is that they're mostly staffed, and I'll say mostly, they're mostly staffed by usually Asian women who don't speak any, if not much, if not any English. How they get a certificate that shows their schooling for massage, 2,200 hours of getting a massage diploma. How they're getting that, we don't know. These are things that as police we need to start looking into because this is a new trend that we're seeing. We're working on it, but we don't have the answers yet. Another thing from the police point is targeting the demand. So next, go to the next slide. Targeting the demand. The Edmonton Police Service does sting operations where we target the buyers of sex or the demand side of the equation. In a market economy, we have supply, demand, price point in the middle. Basic theory. When we're talking about the demand, we're talking about those that are purchasing sex. We're all on the same page on that. So when we target the demand, what we're doing as police is we're setting up an undercover operation where all of ours are having a woman that's putting out a sexual service, and when the man comes to purchase that service, he's committing a criminal code offense. We then arrest him and charge him, and they go through the court process. Kate's going to talk about some of that court process when we talk about John's School. But basically what we're doing is we're setting up these stings quite regularly. Probably not as much as we would like to do, but resources are always scarce. In every business, in every operation, in every governmental structure, there's always competing priorities and a lack of resources. So what we're doing is while we're targeting the demand, we actually are one of the highest police services in the country that are utilizing this theory. If we target the demand and the demand can reduce, then the supply may reduce. That's that economic theory. But we are very short in resources. We also do it on the street. So we do it we do these stings online and we do it on the street. So street is we have a female undercover officer who will play the part of a street level sex trade worker. And then when a man comes up to purchase sex, we follow them away and we arrest them. The online operations, we'll go to the next slide. So online, there is a site called LeoList. LeoList is the new Backpages, if Backpages is a term that people recognize. Backpages got shut down by the FBI last year, 2 years ago. And LeoList took its place. If I wanted to buy and sell a property online, one of the main places I would go to would be Kijiji. It's probably the biggest right now. It's not the only one. There's many others. but I'm going to talk about legal list because it's like the Kijiji for sexual services. If someone were to go online to see pricing or to, if I was interested in that, this is where I would more than likely go, but it certainly isn't the only piece. There's also a lot through social media. There's a lot through other types of web pages. But basically, what we'll do in this targeting the demand is we'll actually put up our own ad, fake obviously, and we'll have our numbers, and our undercover operators will answer the phone, and we'll set up a meet, and that meet's already set up on the phone in that conversation about what sex act for what money. And when that person shows up at the hotel door, they come in and then they get arrested. Okay, so that's kind of the online sting that we do. Something I do want to talk about, we'll just flip that to the associated violence, just the next one there. Before we get into this, I do just want to give out some numbers so that one of the biggest questions that gets asked to me is, okay, Colin, you're talking about how prevalent this is. How prevalent is it? Okay, so let's talk about some numbers with these online stings that we do. I said it's vastly underreported, so we're not getting that statistical comparison. But when we start looking at what's actually happening out there, we'll put on an ad. So we'll put an ad on this Leo list. We'll have it up for about 6 hours because we need some prep time before, we need some prep time after to go through the arrests and all the admin stuff of policing. But in that 6-hour window, we'll probably get over 1,000 clicks. So just hits on our one page. We'll get about 400 text conversations with men, and we'll actually get about 10 to 12 in that 6-hour window that actually come in, and we arrest them. If we had more resources, we could arrest a lot more. But when we're talking about arresting people and how the court process is now, there's a lot of paperwork. So it takes us a long time to process one arrest. If we had more resources, we could do more. But you can see just by the number of hits and just the number of conversations how labor intensive that would be. So that's just one day where that's the demand side of it. If supply equals demand, then how many sex trade workers would we have, right? We have another way of gauging that. Through the Leo List site, there's a way of putting in search categories that we have as police. We have this capability where we can scrape that internet and we can give a good ballpoint as far as how many ads are being posted in a week through this website. And we're getting, on average, about 4,000 different posts every week. So in any given week, there's 4,000 women that are posting ads on this site. So that's just one site. I mentioned there's lots of others, and that's not even talking about child, because they can't post, and it's not even covering what's happening out on our streets right now. So that's just giving a little glimpse into what this is, into how prevalent this issue is. I'll skip over the next couple here to our direction, unit direction. So with the things that I've talked about and my own experiences and the people that I talk to, we need to increase awareness. Within the police, I'm putting on some different types of training to try to even make police more aware of the issue and what can be done. We'll go to the next slide, and the next slide. This is an awareness campaign. This is Mr. Paul Brandt. He's a country superstar, apparently. I don't do country, so I don't know. But I've met him, and he's a super nice man, and apparently he has a good voice too. He started this campaign called #NotInMyCity. And Not in My City is an awareness campaign movement focusing on child sex trafficking and just bringing that awareness piece out. Kate's going to talk about it a little bit more, but I just wanted to bring it up for now, and we'll talk about it in just a little bit. We'll go to the next, see it reported. Okay, so what things can you do? Kate's going to talk a little bit about it as well, but the big thing is if you're seeing something, we need to be able to report it. right now we need more eyes out on the street. We need more people talking about this issue. We need more awareness being pushed out. If you're on social media, start retweeting or reposting or whatever the kids are calling the new programs these days, but get on social media and start being an ambassador for this campaign if you want to make a difference. If you want to make a difference, there's also donations to certain areas. Lack of resources, competing priorities is always a piece. You can help in that equation. Lawmakers, how you vote and letters you write to your representatives make a difference. Those are things that we often don't think about because we vote every 4 years or whatever that is, and then we kind of forget about it. But that person represents you, and if you have issues that you want to change, you have a voice. And the more people we have with voice, the more we can invoke change. The center, there's a national center that started a hotline back in May with some funding from the national government. That hotline is up and operational 24 hours a day with interpreters, and they're receiving information from all over the nation and putting it back to the resources where it's appropriate. If you see anything, know anything, you need to report it. If it's not to the police, please call the hotline. They can forward it to appropriate places as well. And what we'll do as far as questions go, if anybody has any questions, please let Kate go. She has a ton of information and she is a wealth of knowledge in this area. After Kate's done, we're going to have an opportunity for some questions at that time. Until then, just kind of hold off on the questions. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask Kate to come up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin. I hope I remember everything you said I was going to talk more about. And I would just like to begin by saying it's been my great privilege since the early 90s, when I was a young mother in a community near the stadium, where we began to experience a lot of street exploitation, and we turned to working with our beat officers, and then we met, at that time it was called VICE, now it's called Human Trafficking and Exploitation. And it's been my privilege to be part of a very great police force that works with community and with citizens to bring about change, and we only keep getting better and responding to the new challenges. So I feel very excited to be here. There's great energy, and you are stepping up. So my talk's going to be some of the bigger pictures and what more you can do. Click. So again, you're taking the first step. But behind that first step, it was a person, Leah, who learned about human trafficking, and then she brought it to your leadership team and said, we want to do more. And then your leadership team said, yes, let's do more. And then a whole group of people gathered around Leah to put on this incredible day, which extends until the evening. So that's what I want to affirm. There is a task for everyone. Maybe you can't do the organizing that Leah does, but you can do the clicking that Larry's doing to help us. Or maybe you can do the phone calls, or on your table there's those little slips of information about human trafficking. When I first got involved all those years ago, that was one of the things we did, because we were all volunteers. We found a job for everyone, and some of the senior citizens said, I can't come out to a meeting at night, but I will make phone calls to get people out to the meeting. So find that task for everyone as you move forward. And decide what can your community do that's little, and how can you plug into bigger things. This is the one thing I want you all to remember. Colin spoke about it, but if you can just remember this triangle, supply and demand, and that the demand fuels the traffickers. If there was no demand, there'd be no job for traffickers. And in the end, it is all about the money, and about money being used to create a terrible exploitation on people. Yes, click. So I just wanted to talk briefly about what's underneath the sex trade. And just to acknowledge that all of us, and our children are most vulnerable, but all of us swim in what I call a sea of sexualized consumerism. If you can sell it, if it can be bought, and we are all catapulted into this with sexualized clothing for our girls and boys, and many of us are being exposed. Now the big word is pornography, but I think that if we use the word sexually violent and degrading images, then we're not dismissed, because some people say, oh, pornography, you're just being prudish. No, we're talking about sexually violent and degrading images. And girls and boys are being easily exposed. We all live in the world of the cell phone and the computer. And if this is all they know, that is about relationships and human sexuality, this is also part of the challenge. And consumerism, just one little story to add on to something Colin said, and this goes back to 2002, but a group of girls, in junior high, started encouraging each other to go with a man who took them to house parties to exchange sex favors, and it was oral sex, so they didn't think they were doing anything too terrible. But why? It was because they wanted money to go to West Edmonton Mall, and it was a mother who started noticing their daughters coming home with things that they shouldn't have access to, and that mother phoned the police. And then the police began a big investigation, found 50 girls, and they were recruiting each other. The man who was the middleman, he was charged, but it was really hard to catch the men who were at the house paying for those sexual favors. We talked a little bit about realities for women. These are real. We have a lot of girls and women who are struggling with poverty, and again, that temptation of the consumer goods. We also have to face the fact that we need to talk about the hard things around what I would call racialization and discrimination. In our city, both on the street, there's an overrepresentation of Indigenous girls and women. In our massage parlors, there's an overrepresentation of Asian women, and we need to just confront what's happening there. Harshbacks in Canada. Again, with respect to Indigenous women, we're in a time in our history where we have some really positive choices we can make to help heal the past. Sorry, can you hear me better if I'm very sorry that I let the microphone drop. I'm wearing the red dress earrings, and maybe this is something you could do during your Dressember, but I think some of you may have seen red dress posters, or you've heard about them, but it's come to symbolize the murdered and missing women of Canada, and we know that's a very big number of people, that there was a big inquiry, that there are calls to action. And so one of the actions any community can take is to learn more about that. If your community has not had the chance to participate in what's called a blanket exercise, that might be a place to start in 2020. It came out of church groups in Ontario working together and with Indigenous groups to help all of us understand what's happened in our country. Click. So who can be a trafficker or profiteer? I think we have to be equally disturbed about this. The RCMP have a National Human Trafficking Resource Center, and their analysis is that traffickers are primarily between the ages of 18 and 30. So that's young people. I know our EPS team interacted with a 16-year-old boy, two 16-year-old boys who had recruited a 16-year-old girl and gone to a hotel, and they were putting up ads, and she was being sold for sex. So we have to look again what's happening with our young people, and that goes back to that sexualized consumerism. But in a way, anyone can be. It can be the big organized crime, and believe me, they are a factor. But it can be other girls and other boys. It can be boyfriends, husbands, partners, families. It can be brothel and escort agency owners. And it can be the traditional guerrilla pimp that Colin spoke about. Click. So I have a big question. What can we as community do to prevent young people from becoming traffickers? Now, I put this young man's face on the slide because it was in our newspapers, but I'm not going to say his name. He was arrested for human trafficking charges, and he perpetrated violence against the women, the young women that he trafficked, and he did go through a trial, and he was in jail for a while. But I want to know, what's his story? What brought him to this place where he thought it was okay to hurt and exploit and sell? And we have to look at those things. I happen to know he came from a war-torn country. What happened to him in that country? When he came as an immigrant, how was he welcomed in? Did he have access to jobs, housing? And when people don't have access to those basics, they look for ways to find power and use that power over other people to get the money that they need, that we all need to live in this society. So we have to do a lot of work of preventing young people, primarily males, to stop them from becoming traffickers. We click. But we also have girls and women who are traffickers. And again, what happens? Why did they do this to somebody else? And this is just a story from the newspaper a couple years ago about a young woman, 24 years old, and she lured, recruited, groomed, forced young women to provide sex services, and she was arrested and she is in jail. Part of what came out in the trial was that she herself had been exploited at the age of 14. So what happened, what didn't happen to help her go on a new path? I do not excuse the actions of these individuals because they have hurt other people, and they have to be accountable for the harm. We as a community have to look at what leads young people to exploit other people. Click. The other big thing I wanted to talk about was stopping this demand. And how do we help heal men in a broken society? Because that's what it feels like. Our society is very broken. Yesterday, I was at the Sex Trade Offender Program, or John School, with our detectives and other resource people. And we spend 8 Saturdays a year educating the men who the police arrest. We have to look at some, again, big factors. And we tell the men, one reason why we're here today is to help you heal. We want you to reach out for help. 3 out of 4 suicides in Alberta are men. We live in a society where we often take men away from their families to earn the money they need, and therefore away from community. When men come back from working away from their families, how do we help them reconnect to community? Because community can be the healer. So I see a great role for faith communities and ethnocultural communities to be that safe landing place where men can come back to